The newest developments surrounding the young and the restless paint a painfully tangled portrait of guilt, fear, maternal desperation, and emotional reckoning as Abby Winters prepares herself to step into the cold, echoing confines of the correctional facility where Mariah Copeland is being held, knowing that this confrontation is something she has avoided for as long as she possibly could. Despite understanding that Mariah was far from mentally stable during the kidnapping of Dominic Winters, Abby cannot overlook the undeniable truth that her child was taken from her arms, spirited away in a haze of delusion and longing, and thrust into a situation no mother should ever be forced to endure. This knowledge has gnawed slowly, but relentlessly at Abby, creating a hollow ache beneath her determination to remain composed. Because no amount of rationalizing can erase the image of Dominic being carried off under the guise of affection twisted into obsession. She understands truly, painfully understands that Mariah would never have carried out such a plan had she been thinking clearly, had her grip on reality not been frayed by trauma, loneliness, and the resurfacing shadows of her past. But even with compassion lingering in her heart, Abby knows that understanding the motivation does not erase the damage done. The law must still be upheld, boundaries must still be established, and the emotional wounds of the ordeal must still be acknowledged rather than buried beneath layers of sympathy. Dominic may have been physically unharmed, but the experience carved invisible marks on him, shaping fragile patterns of confusion that Abby and Devon Winters have spent weeks trying to unwind. Though he is young enough to interpret the ordeal through the lens of imagination, believing it resembled an elaborate, exhausting game of hide-and-seek rather than a kidnapping, Abby sees how quickly his energy collapsed into exhaustion, how he clung to her when he finally returned home, sensing on some instinctive level that something had been wrong. In her private moments, Abby replays the terrifying possibilities, imagining how close Mariah came to disappearing forever with Dominic, slipping across the border into Mexico, reinventing herself and the child under new names, new identities, constructing a fantasy world where she alone could claim the title of mother and rewrite the meaning of family. The thought chills Abby, not only because of the near loss, but because she once trusted Mariah, once considered her a friend, a woman with whom she had shared vulnerable conversations, hopes, and fears in the delicate months following Dominic's unconventional birth. The betrayal, even one birthed from psychological fracture rather than cruelty, feels like a crack in Abby's foundation, one she has struggled to rebuild piece by piece. Mariah's fixation on becoming Dominic's new mother, her insistence that she alone could shield him from Abby and Devon, reveals a deeper emotional desperation that had gone unnoticed or unspoken for too long. Within the tangled corridors of her mind, she reimagined Dominic not as the child she helped bring into the world through surrogacy, but as her own, a symbol of unconditional connection. A lifeline she had convinced herself she desperately needed to survive her internal unraveling. She had given him the name Bowie, a term of endearment that blurred the line between affection and possession, shaping the child into a beacon of escape from everything that frightened her: past trauma, present instability, and the future she feared she could not control. In her delusion, Mexico represented safety, distance, reinvention. Yet to Abby, this imagined sanctuary is a nightmare, a life in which her son would have been stripped of his identity, his roots, his family, all in service to a woman spiraling far beyond her own awareness. As Abby prepares to see Mariah behind bars, she battles conflicting emotions: rage, sorrow, confusion, and reluctant empathy, struggling to determine which one deserves dominance. She knows Mariah is haunted by the consequences of her own actions, even if she cannot fully comprehend them. But Abby also knows that healing cannot begin until the truth is spoken aloud, until Mariah faces not only the law, but the emotional reality of what she did. Devon, too, has been quietly grappling with the emotional fallout. Though he presents a calm and steady presence for Dominic, there are moments when fear flashes behind his eyes, a silent acknowledgement of the vulnerability that comes with parenthood. He, like Abby, wrestles with the contradictions of feeling sympathy for Mariah's suffering while still recognizing the deep violation of trust. His heart aches not only because his child was taken, but because he once believed Mariah was capable of being part of Dominic's support system rather than the source of his distress. Now, every memory of her is tinged with hesitation, doubt, and a lingering grief for the relationships shattered by a single desperate act. As Abby walks into the prison for the confrontation, she knows this isn't merely about demanding answers. It's about reclaiming her power as Dominic's mother, reaffirming the boundaries that were crossed and refusing to minimize the seriousness of what happened. She must steady herself against the swell of emotion threatening to consume her: anger for the trauma her child endured, sadness for the friendship lost, fear that Mariah's instability could escalate further, and guilt for not recognizing the warning signs sooner. Mariah, in her own confined world, clings to fragments of memory, struggling to reconcile the love she felt for Dominic with the reality of the damage she caused. Somewhere deep inside, she understands that her desire to protect him was distorted by fear and longing, and she now sits in the aftermath of her delusion, a place where remorse and confusion drown her thoughts. This confrontation becomes a turning point, not only for Abby and Mariah, but for everyone orbiting Dominic's life. It forces painful conversations about mental health, trauma, motherhood, and the fragile line between devotion and obsession. Abby must face the uncomfortable truth that even compassion has limits when a child's safety is at stake, while Mariah confronts the shattered remnants of her identity. Piecing together the understanding that love, when warped by desperation, can become dangerous. In the silent space between them, laden with years of intertwined lives and shared memories, one question lingers heavily: can understanding be enough to forgive, even if forgiveness can never erase the past? And as Abby looks into Mariah's conflicted gaze through the reinforced glass, she realizes that the emotional reckoning is only just beginning. And the consequences of this kidnapping will ripple outward far longer than any of them are prepared to admit, shaping future alliances, trust, and the fragile bonds that define Genoa City itself. Mariah Copeland now stands at the center of a legal storm that threatens to redefine her life in ways she never imagined. Facing formal kidnapping charges that strip away every fragile illusion she once clung to and force her to confront the harsh clarity of consequence. The weight of those charges presses down not only on her shoulders, but on the hearts of everyone entangled in the ordeal, especially Abby Winters, who finds herself grappling with questions that refuse to settle into simple answers. Abby cannot stop asking herself what fracture in Mariah's mind could have driven her to such drastic and uncharacteristic action. What internal collapse could have transformed a woman once trusted with the most intimate chapter of Abby's motherhood into someone capable of taking Dominic and attempting to vanish into an entirely new life? The court may label it kidnapping in precise legal terms, but for Abby, the act exists in a more emotionally complicated realm, one that includes betrayal, fear, confusion, and an aching sense of lost trust. She knows Mariah was not operating from a place of clear judgment, yet that understanding does not erase the reality that her son was removed from his home, his routine, his parents, and placed into a destabilizing situation born from delusion. As the legal machinery begins to turn, Abby must reconcile to conflicting truths: that Mariah committed a crime, and that Mariah was not entirely herself when she committed it. When the moment inevitably arrives for Mariah to explain her motivations, clarity may evade her. The hallucinations of Ian Ward have continued to distort her perception, embedding themselves like invasive whispers inside her fractured reasoning. His presence, whether real, imagined, or a residue of unresolved trauma, twisted her thoughts until fear masqueraded as protection and obsession disguised itself as maternal instinct. Attempting to articulate that mental descent to Abby may prove nearly impossible. Words may fail her, sentences may crumble before reaching coherence. Mariah might search for language capable of bridging the chasm between what she believed and what she did, only to find that her explanation dissolves into fragments of memory and confusion. Abby may stand before her waiting for answers that never arrive in the form she needs, because Mariah's mind, still navigating the aftershock of psychological disturbance, cannot neatly translate delusion into rational narrative. The tragedy of the moment lies not only in the crime itself, but in Mariah's inability to fully grasp the distortion that guided her. She believed she was rescuing Dominic, shielding him from perceived danger, reinventing a life where she could finally anchor herself to something permanent. Yet the foundation of that belief was warped by hallucination, fear, and a desperate longing for connection that spiraled out of control. Viewers of The Young and the Restless have long understood that Mariah carries deep psychological and emotional scars. Her past has never been simple. It is layered with abandonment, manipulation, and trauma that left her perpetually seeking stability. Abby, even through her pain, may begin to recognize those fractures more clearly when they finally meet face to face. The anger Abby carries is real and justified, yet it exists alongside a reluctant awareness that Mariah's actions were not born from cruelty, but from collapse. That duality creates a complicated emotional landscape. Abby may feel her chest tighten with resentment when she remembers Dominic's absence. But she may also see in Mariah's eyes the unmistakable signs of someone unraveling long before the kidnapping occurred. Compassion does not erase accountability, yet it complicates vengeance. Abby cannot simply cast Mariah as a villain without acknowledging the human fragility that contributed to this outcome. There is no magical solution to this crisis, no swift emotional resolution capable of restoring everything to the way it was. Abby understands that she cannot wave away the trauma with forgiveness alone, nor can she ignore the necessity of legal consequences. At the same time, she recognizes that Mariah requires mental health support if there is to be any hope of preventing further harm. The situation demands balance, protection for Dominic, accountability for Mariah, and intervention for the psychological instability that fueled the act. Abby's strength as a mother now lies not only in defending her child, but in resisting the temptation to reduce Mariah's breakdown to simple malice. She may not be ready to forgive, and reconciliation feels impossibly distant, but she is perceptive enough to understand that untreated mental collapse will only perpetuate suffering. The friendship between Abby and Mariah is shattered, perhaps beyond immediate repair, yet history between them cannot be erased. They once navigated the emotional complexities of surrogacy together, trusting each other in vulnerable moments. That shared past lingers in the background, complicating anger with memory. Abby knows that rebuilding trust will not happen soon, if it ever happens at all, but time can create space for reflection, growth, and eventual healing. For now, the path forward is steep and uncertain. Mariah must endure a grueling legal battle that will expose every unstable thought, every hallucination, every moment of distorted reasoning to public scrutiny. Court proceedings will not simply examine the physical act of kidnapping, they will dissect her mental state, her history, her relationship with Ian Ward, and the psychological deterioration that blurred her moral compass. The legal storm gathering around her will be relentless, but Mariah will not face it entirely alone. Christine Blair Romolodi is expected to step forward as her attorney, bringing experience, precision, and a deep understanding of Genoa City's intricate moral terrain. Christine's involvement signals that the case will not be handled lightly. She will navigate the fine line between defending Mariah's rights and acknowledging the seriousness of the crime. The courtroom will become a battleground not only of evidence, but of interpretation. Was Mariah a calculating kidnapper, or a woman suffering from severe psychological impairment? Christine will likely argue for recognition of Mariah's compromised mental state, emphasizing the hallucinations of Ian Ward and the distorted thinking that overtook her judgment. Yet even the most skilled legal strategy cannot erase the emotional damage endured by Abby and Devon. As this legal struggle unfolds, Abby will continue wrestling with her own internal conflict. She must protect Dominic above all else, ensuring his emotional stability and sense of security are restored. Yet she may also find herself reflecting on how quickly trust can fracture, how mental health can deteriorate in silence, and how thin the line can be between devotion and obsession. Mariah's longing to become Dominic's new mother, to sever him from Abby and Devon under the guise of protection, revealed a vulnerability that had festered unnoticed. It was not a scheme born from greed or vengeance, but from an identity crisis so severe that reality bent beneath it. That truth does not excuse the act, but it reshapes its context. The coming weeks promise emotional intensity for all involved. Mariah's legal defense will demand transparency about her psychological struggles. Abby will likely be called to testify, forced to relive the nightmare in precise detail. Devon will stand firm beside her, balancing controlled anger with quiet grief. Dominic, shielded from the legal complexities, will slowly regain his sense of normalcy, yet the adults around him will never forget how close they came to losing him entirely. And beneath it all, a question lingers: can accountability and compassion coexist in a situation so deeply painful? Can justice be pursued without extinguishing empathy? The answer will not emerge overnight. It will evolve slowly through courtroom arguments, emotional confrontations, and private reckonings. What is certain, however, is that this chapter marks a defining shift for Mariah, Abby, and everyone connected to Dominic's world. The legal battle may determine Mariah's immediate fate, but the deeper resolution, one rooted in healing, responsibility, and perhaps eventual reconciliation will take far longer to unfold.